On today's World Insight, host South Africa pulls out all the stops in preparing for the Johannesburg BRICS Summit in August. Up for discussion is the growing number of countries looking to join BRICS. What else is on the agenda? And China-US relations may be messy at the moment, but author Peter Walker sees light at the end of the tunnel. Genuine hope or wishful thinking?
So I think at the end of the day, given that both countries are feeling real economic pressure for their own internal security with their own domestic markets, they have to solve the problem.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. The upcoming BRICS Summit in August is shaping up to be one for the books. South Africa, as this year's BRICS chair, has been busy working on preparations and on the key agenda of expanding membership. The South African ambassador to the BRICS said more than 40 countries, including all of the major developing Global South countries, have expressed interest in becoming BRICS members, and 22 countries have formally asked to join. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has also invited the heads of all African countries to the upcoming BRICS Summit in Johannesburg to engage in dialogue with BRICS leaders. Besides looking to welcome more members, what's at stake in this year's summit? Let's loop in our panelists. I'm joined in Beijing by Professor He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow from the Institute of West Asian and African Studies with Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Also joining us in New Delhi, Dr. Avinash Godbole, Associate Professor and Associate Academic Dean at JSLH in New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. Now, the upcoming BRICS Summit is going to be a great moment for emerging economies and developing countries, the so-called Global South, to gather together and work on some of the most important issues. Professor He, what do you make of the prospect of the summit, and now leading up to the summit, the intense interactions among leaders of the region?
Well, I think now is a great moment for those Global South, to especially those emerging countries. They are coming from those Global South because they developed faster, the economic situation and also diplomatic influence are much, much bigger than other South countries. So that is why this BRICS country now getting more and more attractive to many, many other new members.
Dr. Godbole, your thoughts on the upcoming BRICS Summit and the leading up interactions among countries of the Global South?
Yes, just as I was looking through the agenda of the BRICS Summit in South Africa, there's an agenda on equitable transition, on global economy. Of course, Ukraine crisis and the inflation, food crisis and other issues remain for India and other countries, but also fuel, the supply of fuel and sustainable supply of fuel over the long term will remain an issue. Education and skill-based development is an important area, and I'm happy that BRICS is talking about education, but also Africa-based theme, focusing on development in Africa, sustainable development in Africa, mutual benefit in Africa and elsewhere. And I also appreciate the last agenda item in the issue, that women's participation in the peace and security process from bottom up at all levels. So it's a good idea in general.
Professor He, the factor of Africa is going to be one of the most important characteristics for this year's BRICS Summit.
Yes, because South Africa now this time is serving as the rotation chair country for the BRICS Summit. That is why now South Africa want to make full use of these chances now to bring the African leaders on the table. So that is why South African President Ramaphosa invited all the African heads of state come over to South Africa to join this discussion. I think it want to show this time's BRICS Summit want to put Africa's issue at the key of the topic. Because he also saying the African regional integration issue and also how to kick off and develop faster about the free trade zone in Africa. Those things will be the key concern of the BRICS Summit. And also, because we have been talking about Africa suffering now 3 kinds of crises simultaneously, that is food crisis, fuel crisis, and the financial crisis. So all those crises also links with now we are suffered from 3 years pandemic, COVID-19, and now we are also suffering from the consequences coming from 1.5 years, this Ukraine crisis. So all those African issues, of course, no doubt, will relate with the international situation as well. So that is why from this summit, South Africa will also want to address the issue, that is how to improve African development, this international environment, including also the climate change, because South Africa and Africa as a whole also suffering from the consequences from this global warming. Now everywhere in the world, we are suffering from the heat waves, so a lot. So that is why I think this time around, African this ownership now becoming very important, and how to engage with BRICS country as well.
What about trade, Professor He?
Oh yes, of course. To improve the trade links between Africa and also with the BRICS members, that has been always serving as a very important engine for bringing Africa and the BRICS together. For example, because this year, 2023, that is the 25th years anniversary for China-South Africa diplomatic ties established. So South Africa also, quite actively joined like Shanghai International Import Expo, China organized since 2018. This import expo, not export expo, because during past 40 years, China has serving as the world factory. We are just exporting all those made in China manufactured goods to all over the world, serving as the world factory. But now since 2018, we are doing import expo now. China is doing the change ourselves from world factory to biggest world market. So within this transition, I think all the African countries, of course, including South Africa, now they got a big chances. Now they can send their commodities all the way to Chinese market to be loved by Chinese customer. By the way, we have some plan. Saying given the 3 years time, we will import as many as $300 billion commodities from Africa.
Right. The other thing is about the BRICS banks. And there's not only interest, of course, Professor He, from the from African countries, but also from the Middle East as well, to be more diversified in terms of membership of international financial institutions, isn't it?
Yes. This is becoming very obvious, intentions. Yeah, because like SEO, normally just linking with China with those central, Asian countries. But now go further to Middle East, like Saudi Arabia also want to join, like UAE saying we're also interested to join. Now go further, even to North African country like Egypt. So which means now geographically now is all the way expanding to the Middle East and then North Africa. Yeah, same like a BRICS country. Before it's just talking about economically, they are emerging this power. And then now goes to even the topic. Not only just to focus on economic issue, also goes to security and the diplomatic, those concerns. So I think this is a trend, which means those Middle East and also as well as Asia and Africa countries, now they want to make full play of this global south, this platform.
Right. We are seeing, Dr. Gopal, the emergence of multiple multilateral mechanisms, like being mentioned, the BRICS, and also as CEO, and the list goes on. Certainly there is going to be some kind of friendly competition even among these mechanisms about which can deliver, and which can deliver to most of the members, and which can deliver for the future. Your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. That sort of competition may be a good thing for these organizations, but in a way, I still believe that BRICS and SCO have fundamentally different agendas and fundamentally different paths to grow, and the directions in which they would like to grow. focusing on the BRICS, these large developing countries that are looking for trade opportunities, finance, sustainable development, and healthcare expansion. Actually, again, I believe while in the days of COVID, in the last 2.5 years, there was some progress, but again, there's some kind of a backstage or slowing of pace on healthcare strategies. So that may be again another area of cooperation. And like the South Africa agenda mentions, the participation of women in peacemaking and peacekeeping processes in Africa and elsewhere, that may be an important agenda. Right.
Africa
peace is also sustainable peace is also a core concern as such. And BRICS should define what do we mean by sustainable peace, what sort of post-conflict outcomes we want to achieve in regions where ethnic conflicts are there, and what sort of post-conflict societies we imagine. That is one area where BRICS maybe can have an impact as a developing country perspective.
Africa has been very outspoken, Professor He. For example, after 3 years of the pandemic, the South African president was speaking on the sideline of some international gathering and suggesting openly that at the time of crisis, there were not many that were on the line to help, but rather rich country has been hoarding their vaccines, preventing them from reaching developing economies and emerging economies. And his country, he suggested in one of his speeches, was certainly suffering as a result. Of course, as we know, Professor He, developing countries are supporting each other. The South-South cooperation is really reflected in this part, for example, from China and some of the other developing countries to African continent.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I also watched South African President Ramaphosa's his speech, during the sideline talks, either G7 or recently in Paris, that the conference organized by, French President Macron. So actually, I paid great attention to hear Ramaphosa's speech. Actually, he used 7 times about the beggar, saying African countries are not beggars. For vaccine, for development assistance, for investment, and we are not the beggars. So you see, of course, his way, his tone shows a great anger for this kind of situation. When African countries are in need, and then during the pandemic times, and then no vaccines available, some rich countries just pay the lip service. Actually, there's no single vaccine landed in Africa, those airports. You see, this is the very angry and also very, I even cannot use any words to express this feeling. It's not the sympathy to his words or like, what kind of thing, but it shows a kind of, South country, now they cannot rely on any other sympathy, any other so-called charity. They have to walk up, stand up firmly to unite among themselves. Because during the past pandemic years, actually all those helping hand coming from South countries themselves.
Before we go, I would love to have very briefly the expectations of both of you for the upcoming BRICS Summit and what's the most important thing to prepare for it. Dr. Gabol.
Well, I'm actually more focused on the ongoing summit that is happening today, tomorrow, and day after, the national security advisors. So I'll limit my comments on that. As the largest summit is concerned, I'm certain expansion of BRICS is on the cards, and I'll be happy to see if BRICS includes maybe 3 or 5 members by the end of this year in the BRICS fold and inside the BRICS bank. That will be a good development as I see.
Professor He, your expectations?
Yeah, my expectation, I think at least 3 things can be wished to see. One is the membership expansion. Second is whether the BRICS will come out with a common stance, this policy or statement towards now Ukraine crisis. And thirdly, of course, how is the way like BRICS can help Africa to speed up its economic integration process, because now the host country is South Africa. So BRICS will talk more about how to team up with Africa as a whole to deal with those 3 crises now.
He Wenping and Avinash Gabol, thank you so much for both of you joining us. Appreciate it.